Hey everyone, so we've got a probability tree question here. I'm going to teach you all about probability trees, what they mean, how to use them, and hopefully by the end you'll be able to tackle these sorts of questions yourself. So we've got the question on the left, but first I want to explain the diagram on the right. So picture probability trees or tree diagrams as probabilities and paths. Now it wouldn't work necessarily this way in real life, but let's say you're at the end of a street and you can go left or right, and for some reason there's a 70% chance you'll go right and a 30% chance you'll go left. Or if you took 10 people, 70% went right, 30% went left, and then once you get to the end of that street, then there's two more routes and they have a 50% chance, or 0.5, and that is effectively a probability tree or tree diagram. So it'll tell you the probability of each outcome and then the probability of the next outcome based on the previous outcome. And you can times them together or add them to try to work out, what the probability or result might be of, certain outcomes or multiple outcomes. And then you can times them together or subtract them from one another to work out how likely an outcome will be. This will make a bit more sense once we do the example. And a note, something for you to keep in mind, is that probabilities should all add up to 1. And that's because 1 is equivalent to 100%, and it means it's taken into account all outcomes. Whether you have 3, 4, 5, 10, a million different possibilities, doesn't matter what percent or chance they are, as long as it all adds to 1 or 100%, because that means every possibility has been taken into account. So let's jump into the question. Question number 10 says that Shakir has to complete 2 tests. He can either pass or fail each test. The probability that he will pass the first test is 0.87, which is 87%. If he passes the first test, the probability he will pass the second test is 0.94. If he fails the first test, the probability he will pass the second test is 0.73. Then it asks us to complete this diagram on the right and also work out the probability that Shakir passes at least one of the tests. So let's start by filling in this diagram. So 0.87 is already on the diagram. That shows the probability of him passing the first test. We are also told that if he passes the first test, the probability he will pass the second test is 0.94, and if he fails the first test, the probability he will pass the second test is 0.73. So we can put these two onto our diagram. All you have to do is look at the diagram. So, he's passed and then he's passed again. We're told that from that pass to that next pass, the probability is 0.94. And the same for the 0.73. So we're looking at the probabilities that he will pass or fail and pass, and we're given them, so we've just put them into this diagram. And if we want to work out the remaining probabilities, we just subtract the value from 1, like I said before. If you have a situation, the outcome or the sum of all the probabilities of the outcomes will equal 1. So for example, for the first part of it, 0.87, well, if they have to add to 1, then the probability of him failing the test will be 0.13, because that's the value that is left and there's only one other outcome. So we apply that logic to the first part and then the other parts as well. So you do 1 minus the probability we know, and then we're given the remainder. Now this works for 2 reasons. 1, we're dealing with each of these situations that have 2 different outcomes, okay? So we only have to take 2 variables into account, and we know one of them. And we also know that the probability of, one outcome or the other outcome add up to 1, because, it's the only 2 possibilities we have. And that's why we know to subtract the probability of, for example, pass against 1 or from 1, and that will give us the probability of a fail. Hopefully that makes sense, but let me know if you have any comments or questions. Feel free to drop them down below. I'll do my best to try and get back to you there. So next we're asked to work out the probability that Shakir passes at least one of his tests. So just another bit, I guess, of education as well. If you look at the probability for him to pass and then pass again, so it's 0.87 for him to pass, and then for him to pass again from there, it's 0.94. But if you want to know the probability of all the 4 final outcomes, you can consider these as like stages. So step 1, there's a 0.87% chance, or 0.87 chance that he will pass, and then 0.13 that he will fail. And then let's say he's passed. For him to then pass or then fail, it would be a 0.94 or 0.06. So if you wanted to know the probability, the total probability that he will pass and then pass again, you times 0.87 and 0.94. And then you times the 4 combinations, and you can put them at the end, and it will tell you the probability of each route, and it should add up to 1. So when we're asked to work out the probability that Shakir passes at least one of the tests, I've highlighted the possible routes that will match this criteria. So obviously, if he passes on the first step, he's passed at least one. So that's all we need to know. Now, if he's failed, I've still got a green line there because it's like he could pass, but he could fail. So if he passes, he obviously meets that criteria. And if he fails, he doesn't. So one thing I could do is add up the probabilities of all the outcomes, because we times them together to work out the joint probability of those two things happening. But now we need to work out all the different possibilities separately because they add together, because they're all the outcomes, so they add together to make one. So what we could do is 0.87 times 0.94 plus 0.87 times 0.06 and then 0.13 times 0.73. And then we could add them all together, take them away from one, or not take them away from one. We'll add them all together and that'd be the probability of at least one pass. But an easier thing to do is, because we know all those final probabilities at the end where the squares are, add to 1. All we'd have to do is work out the probability of him failing twice, because that will meet the criteria, and then we just subtract that from 1, and the remainder will be our answer. Because remember, they all add up to 1. So what I can do is 1 minus the probability of him failing twice. That means he didn't pass at least one. So we do 1 minus 0.13 times 0.27. That's going to be equal to 1 minus 0.0351. And this is a calculator exam, so that's how you can work that out. And it's equal to 0.9649. Now, I do think this is kind of an abstract concept, and I'm a mathematician, I have a maths degree, I've always, understood maths quite well, but I do think statistics, for me, or these kind of things can be a bit confusing. So don't be confused, or, don't feel bad if you're struggling, because I do think these things can be a bit confusing and abstract. So I would recommend, looking up some videos or doing some practice questions. I'm really trying to get your head around probability, or it might just click naturally for you. But if it is a bit confusing, look into a bit more, look into the differences between two things happening where you multiply, or if we want to work out the probabilities of all of them added together. So, there's a this much % chance it'd be this outcome, this much. So what would the chance would be one of these 3 outcomes or 3 of these 4 outcomes? And that's kind of what we did for the second part. So hopefully that made sense. Hopefully it was clear. Again, leave any comments or questions if you have them. Best of luck with all your maths, and thank you for watching.